.com/public. And WBUR presenting Endless Thread, a podcast about the Internet's untold histories and unsolved mysteries, from stories about a mountain of dishware in the woods to the world's largest glitter consumer. Endless Thread. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
To prevent another 2008 financial collapse, big banks must perform annual stress tests. Now they're suing to overhaul stress tests, which they believe are
random, arbitrary, and ultimately bad for the U.S. economy as a whole because they're forcing banks, we think, to hold a lot more capital than is warranted.
But of course it was a lack of capital that contributed to the '08 crash in the first place. That's coming up Monday on Point.
WAER keeping you informed with support from Hematology Oncology Associates of CNY, featuring a dedicated team of physicians, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and nurses across 3 offices. HOA combines decades of experience with a personalized and holistic approach to help provide patients with comprehensive cancer care that's miles ahead, not miles away. Learn more at hoacny.com.
You're listening to 88.3 WAER Syracuse Public Media, your local NPR station from the Newhouse School at Syracuse University.
SportsNite, your home for all SU sports talk.
Syracuse players, they don't find a player box out. They turn around and try to jump up and grab the ball. That's not rebounding. That's not boxing out. That's lazy. It is nowhere close to an overreaction to say that they can go 500 or better in ACC play.
I think there's something to be said about that specific phenomenon. 5 guys saying there's no backup plan. It's just us.
Breaking down everything from around the hill.
When you get doubled up on your shots and even one more to put a cherry on top, there's no possible way you can win a lacrosse game.
You can tell it just dissipates out of nowhere. And it's the in-game adjustments that have hurt Syracuse.
And giving hot takes along the way.
Naheem McLeod, they want him to be Jesse Edwards, and he just isn't.
Fran Brown is a home run hire for Syracuse.
Get your voice heard by calling in at 315-443-2011 or interact with us on social media at WAER Sports Talk. It's Sports Night, and it starts right now.
Welcome into Sports Night here on a Friday night. AJ Myers alongside Luke Burgess. Not your typical Sports Night tonight, Luke, because we're diving into all things
extra exciting.
Yes, extra exciting because lacrosse season starts tomorrow here on WAER. Syracuse men's lacrosse takes on Jacksonville at noon. Luke, how excited are you? Besides the X's and O's, how excited are you for this lacrosse season?
I'm really excited, AJ, and I don't say that just to hype up the audience or get people pumped up. I mean, this is the number 2 team in the country, and of course the excellence in other Syracuse sports, particularly with the men's basketball team, just hasn't quite been what Syracuse fans are accustomed to this year. So there's a lot to be excited about here because this is a team that really the expectation, the bare minimum, is Final Four.
Yeah.
And they have a real chance to do something special this year.
You mentioned that. This is the highest preseason ranking in the Gary Gate era. That's 4 seasons for Coach Gate. If you want to get involved in this men's lacrosse talk here that we're going to have, we're also going to talk some women's lacrosse a little bit later. You can call in 315-556-3929. We're also on Twitter and YouTube. You can watch us there at WAER Sports Talk. You can text us 315-556-3929. The call number 315-443-2011. Luke, you mentioned the expectations. That's what I want to start off first. What are the expectations this year for Gary Gate? Because in my opinion, it's get to Memorial Day weekend. You don't got to win it all. You just got to get to Memorial Day weekend. Because in the 4 years, for me, it's like a ladder. The first year was an awful season. I think they only won 4 or 5 games.
Yeah,
rebuild year,
worst record in program history.
Rebuild year, throw that season in the trash. Yeah. The next one was about gaining experience. You didn't get to the postseason, but you gained a lot of experience. Last year was all about just getting to the postseason and probably winning a game, winning that home game. They did that. Now you've got the postseason experience. You've got a veteran roster. Now it's all about getting to Memorial Day weekend for me.
You know, I want to take it a step further, AJ.
Really?
Honestly, I think that they have to get to the national championship game. Because it's such a talented roster. You look at every single position. The only thing you can really question even a little bit is the defense. There needs to be, I think, someone else to step up. You've got some transfers coming in. Michael Grace, a long stick midi from RIT, and he's kind of had a tough career there with injuries and whatnot, but a super talented player. So there are some question marks on the back end. I just think overall, though, with the way that the attack looks and the way that the midfield looks, I mean, this is one of the best offenses in the nation. If not for Notre Dame, then not probably the best offense in the nation, but Notre Dame is just on another level.
Well, they're down at Kavanaugh, brother, finally.
Right. Yeah. Regardless of that, I still think there's just so much firepower on this team, and for it to not gel in the right way, I just feel like if you don't play in that last game, if you're not playing on that Monday, then maybe it's a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth. I mean, they were one game away from Memorial Day weekend last year.
They
so
were.
If you can't get over it.
You're okay with a loss in the championship if they were to, let's go real hypothetical.
I mean, I don't want to say that. Because if you get there, you obviously want to win.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I'm certainly not okay with a loss. But, realistically, I still think, at least going into the season, there's a whole lot of lacrosse to be played, obviously. Mm-hmm. But Notre Dame's roster is so well-rounded.
I do think the gap is thinned because I thought last
100%.
year it was Notre Dame and everyone else. I mean, I know Maryland got hot there, and they kind of, for me, made things
interesting. But look at the way that
interesting.
things went in the national championship game.
You clearly saw
Notre
the best
Dame was
team.
head and shoulders above everyone last year. I agree with you. The gap has thinned.
It kind of reminded me of like LSU football when they won the national championship. It was just like no one was ever going to stop that team. Right. No one was ever going to stop. Probably Notre Dame the last 2 years. No one was ever going to stop them. But I do think the gap's closed. That's a perfect opportunity for a team like Syracuse.
It is, and it really largely starts with the attack that they have.
One guy.
I mean, Joey Spallina, he's second best odds right now to win the Tewaaraton Award. And the issue with Joey last year was certainly not the statistics. 37 goals, 51 assists. This year, he's preseason All-ACC, which I think everyone expects, first team going into the year. But the issue with him last year was that he couldn't perform against the big teams. And he kind of finally broke out of that toward the end of the season when he had a couple big performances, specifically against Johns Hopkins. He was really good in that game, but then in postseason play, kind of silent against Duke. And then I don't want to include Denver in that because Denver just shut down Syracuse's entire offense, and that was their game, being a good defensive team. But yeah, Joey's got to step up against the big teams and continue to do what he did against the weaker teams this year.
I mean, I was always last season when he wasn't performing necessarily to the heights. I wasn't super critical of it because he was getting double teamed. It was hard for him to get in open space and get those shots off. So I wasn't super critical when he wouldn't show up in big games because when they lost those big games, I never said, Joey Spallina, it's your fault. You underperformed today. I didn't think it was solely ever his fault.
Right, I agree with that. I think he got a little bit too much hate. But at the same time, I mean, if you look at what Joey has said to the media, he embraces that pressure. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to run away or say, I'm getting double teamed. It's tough out there, which credit to him, obviously. I don't think anyone's going to go out there and say this is too hard. But at the same time, he is almost embracing the challenge of being double teamed and saying, well, I should still score in those circumstances. Yeah. And he can still use it as an excuse. He might not say, it's too hard, but he could say, look, I'm getting double teamed every single time against, Ajax Zapatello or some of the other best defenders in the country. Zapatello's gone from Maryland as well. That makes them a bit of a weaker team. But Joey, I think, wants the pressure, and I feel like this is the year that he either has to kind of put up or shut up, right? If he is going to be one of those elite players in the country, a guy who's going to be a top 3 PLL pick, which is entirely possible, potentially win the Tewaaraton, then he's got to do it against the best of the best. And that's really been the one knock on his game through the first 2 years. Because apart from that, I mean, he is a stellar player.
Yeah, I mean, the stats speak for themselves, and I'm a big reference guy. I'm big comparing things. I'm going to compare. I want to, put your seatbelts on here because this comparison could sound a little crazy. But in terms of hype and expectation and pressure, I mean, Joey Spallina's got that kind of like LeBron James. People knew about LeBron James when he was 12. People in the lacrosse world knew about Joey Spallina for years before he even stepped on the hill.
Yeah.
So I don't think pressure and performing at a high level is really an issue because he's had pressure his whole entire career.
Yeah,
before he got to
you're
Syracuse.
right. I think what it was is his sophomore year of high school, he had a viral video of a behind-the-back goal, which he's now kind of made his signature.
That's his shot, yeah.
Yeah, and, honestly, I agree with you in the sense that I think he is a guy who can perform under pressure. It's just going to be, and it's crazy to say this because he had 51 assists last year, but if he can continue to find guys in perfect positions to score when he is double teamed and continue to expand that passing game, whether that's from X or out in front of Cage. Honestly, I don't want to get on too much of a tangent, but I would like to see him expand his passing game in front of Cage this year because we know how good of a distributor he is from behind the cage. If he can get that going on the edges from the goal line, from that area where he can find cutters moving inside, I think that's what could elevate his game against those best teams.
And one of those cutters that I think he could find would be a player like Michael Leo, who I think was one of those guys that really took a leap last season, got 28 goals, 9 assists. He's got to build off of that, I think, definitely, for this team to have success.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Leo is he is the best downhill scorer on this team for sure. I think, Owen Hiltz is more that stand and shoot type of guy. And Michael Leo obviously has the midfield pedigree where he can move into space, and he's a little bit more versatile than Owen Hiltz is. So, yeah, it's another guy who's got to step up because he was another player that didn't really perform when he was needed at certain times last year. He would go cold at times, but he certainly has the capability. That guy has got a rocket of a shot, one of the hardest shots on the team, super physical, super athletic. I know last year he talked a bunch about how he could have been a football player. He kind of wanted to be a football player out of high school.
Don't tell Fran Brown that. He could convert him.
It's been done.
Yeah, I know it has.
He talked about Notre Dame. Jordan Faison just played in a national championship game. He actually missed the first week of practice because he had to practice for football, and then he goes straight into lacrosse. That's aside from being grueling on the body, my goodness. Yeah, but at the same time, I think Michael Leo could do it. He's a physical guy, and he's got that talent. But he's got to continue, like I said, to be a rover. Be a guy who Joey can look for, which is exactly kind of how you started the whole thing.
Someone who else spoke highly of Michael Leo was Terry Foy of Inside Lacrosse. This is what he had to say.
I'm going to cheat a little bit and say that I think Michael Leo is probably the most underrated player in college lacrosse right now, insofar as if you were to say who could be a first-team All-American that many people aren't thinking about right now, I would say, all right, name the player, or give me a list of players in order from the likelihood that they are a first-team All-American. Just on this roster, he's probably 6th or 7th on most people's lists, and for me, he's 3rd, probably.
There you go. There you have it. I think that shows the importance that Michael Leo will have, and kind of playing that Robin almost to Joey Spallina in a way.
Right. But at the same time, AJ, it also shows me how much variability there is in Michael Leo's potential performance.
Absolutely.
Because there is a chance that he kind of gets lost in the shuffle nationally a little bit. Obviously, he's going to be a big piece for Syracuse. He has been a big piece for the Orange for the past few years. But if he can be a guy who is on people's national radar and, one of the first guys that, maybe Joey Spallina becomes more of a distributor this year. And then when the tape gets turned on and you're prepping against the Orange, you got to say, hey, when Michael Leo's running down the middle of the field, someone needs to pick him up because otherwise he's going to score. He doesn't quite have that killer instinct where he's going to score every single time, what we saw out of Owen Hiltz last year.
Another guy.
But Michael Leo has the potential to be that, 100%. And I think that's because of his physicality. And because of his speed, he really does play a wide receiver type game, right? On the lacrosse field. So if he can kind of embrace that this year, lean into that a little bit more, I think the Orange are going to be in really good shape.
Two other guys that really put up big numbers for this team last year were Owen Hiltz and Finn Thompson. Two guys, again, they're going to have to keep those points up. Finn Thompson had 24 goals. Owen Hiltz had 38. Got to do the same this year if you want to win a national championship.
Right. To me, the first two guys we talked about in Leo and Spallina, I've kind of referenced them as guys who could reach another level maybe. It's crazy to say that about Spallina, but I feel like Owen Hiltz, we kind of saw the peak of what he is last year, and if he can just do that again, that's great. That is a guy who just posts up in the right spot. He kind of will drift into space. Once again, to reference another sport, he kind of gives me the Alex Ovechkin vibes, right? He stands at the circle, waits for a pass, and then just bombs it. And so, Owen Hiltz is a great contributor. He's a super senior. That this is his last year playing, and I think if you can get another 35-plus goal campaign from him, that's a huge win. He's got obviously some passing ability as well. Like he did have 27 assists last year, so this is a guy who can distribute the ball as well. But I want him to focus more on shooting. I would not mind if he was below 20 assists and we saw maybe 40-plus goals. I mean, that would be fantastic.
He'd be that anchor in terms of scoring goals for this team.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that is because the other guy you talked about, Finn Thompson, right? Finn Thompson, who maybe plays a little bit more of a hybrid role this year because you add a guy like Michael Grace. You've got some other guys coming in, Ochoa, who can be, play a little bit more on that back end as well. So I think it opens up the possibility for Finn Thompson to be more of a midfield, like playing more in that midfield.
Creator's role.
Exactly. Like spread out a little bit more, be a guy who can take passes from Spallina from the goal line and find guys cutting inside. You look at his numbers last year, 14 assists. I think you'd like that to be a little bit higher this year. But, he's another physical body. He's not as big as a Michael Leo or an Owen Hiltz even. But he's got a ton of skill scoring the ball as well. I just think really this is the year that by the time everything wraps up, or, we're talking about a postseason run or whatnot, I think you really want to have more defined roles for all of these guys. Because right now, I know what Spallina's role is, and I know what Owen Hiltz's role is. I really want Finn Thompson and Michael Leo to really lean into a role. Because I feel like when Michael Leo would kind of slow down at times last year, or he would have a couple games where he didn't score a bunch, it would be because he was kind of searching a little bit. He was pressing maybe a little bit too much. So if you can get distinguished roles for Thompson and Leo, I really think there's no reason this can't be the best attack in the country.
Talking about the attackers here on SportsNite, AJ Myers alongside Luke Burgess. If you want to get involved in the conversation, if there's an attacker we haven't mentioned or another player we just simply haven't mentioned, give us a call, 315-443-2011. Luke, we're almost up against our first break, but there's something important I want to touch on, and I didn't really think about this until we had a conversation with Tim Leonard, who's the voice of Syracuse men's lacrosse on the radio. He was talking about the goalie situation. There's no more Will Mark, and everyone kind of thought Jimmy McCool would be the guy, but Tim brought up an interesting point.
Will Mark was terrific in goal, and I've heard good things about Jimmy McCool. You could see Michael Ippolito, too. I mean, I think that's a closer race than maybe the average fan thinks. I'd be surprised if it's not Jimmy McCool starting against Jacksonville and they don't go from there, because McCool was the guy we saw replace Will Mark last year in that Duke game. And I think he's been the backup or considered the heir apparent to Will Mark for a little bit.
I think that's interesting. And the way I put it, I'm going to make another reference. You know how they say 2 quarterbacks is no quarterbacks? I think in lacrosse, 2 goalies is no goalies. You want to have your solidified number one option at the goalkeeper position. And I think Jimmy McCool does have a little bit of pressure on him. He's got to start performing early, because if he doesn't, people are going to be calling for his name and calling for something different. Because Will Mark was a stud. I know he had a few down games, but he was a stud for this team.
Yeah, and Michael Ippoliti maybe is a little bit more ready than people think, based off what we've heard from practice. Like, this is a guy who is pretty much step for step with Jimmy McCool talent-wise, and he's only a sophomore. So when Tim's talking about the fact that, Jimmy was the guy who came in last year, I think a large part of that is because Ippoliti only had 1 year of practice versus Jimmy McCool had 2 years of practice, and he's a bigger body as well. So he's a guy who's going to adjust easier to the game. But I will say, surprises can be good. Do not forget about what happened with Duke last year. Patrick Jamison took over in training camp, preseason, whatever you want to call it, and ended up being one of the best goalies in the country. Exactly. So just because you might not know your guy at the beginning of the year, I think that can still be a positive thing. Like, if you're seeing good signs
I just don't think
practice,
it's a bad thing if it's like midway through the year.
No, you want to have a distinguished number one.
Yeah.
No doubt. I will say real quick, though, because I know we got to get out of here, but I do think that Jimmy McCool, despite all that, is going to be the number one.
I think so, too. I remember that Duke game, he looked pretty solid, and he was coming in a bad situation. They were already down
everything that we've heard out of Gary Gate and the practices so far is that McCool has been the top performer.
Yeah.
I think he's going to start tomorrow and start most of the season.
Yeah, well, Syracuse takes on Jacksonville tomorrow. You can listen to that one on WAAR starting 11:30 with McClurg Remodeling. Countdown to face-off. That's right, it's face-off time. We're going to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere, because on the other side, we're going to be talking women's lacrosse and their expectations for the year.
Pixies changed the shape of alternative music in the late 80s and early 90s, and beyond if you factor in all of the bands they've influenced. For Sense of Place Boston, we're rebroadcasting a 2019 conversation with Black Francis of Pixies, and featuring live performances. It's Pixies for Sense of Place Boston on the Next World Cafe.
Saturday afternoon at 1 on WAER. And streaming live on WAER.org.
Delve into the rich tapestry of acoustic-led folk, roots, and Americana music here on 88.3 FM WAER. Enjoy national and international acts, as well as local artists every Sunday with host Pete Thomas. Whether you are seeking the comfort of timeless classics or contemporary gems and music discovery, don't miss Common Threads, Sundays from 2 to 5, exclusively on 88.3 WAER, your local NPR station.
Just a few years after creating the British funk outfit Cymende, its founders went in another direction. I met a lot of lawyers who'd like to be big music stars, but never the other way around. What were you thinking?
It's backward thinking, actually.
4 decades on.
Back to Sports Night here on WAER. Luke Burgess joined alongside AJ Myers. We're about to talk some women's lacrosse, another team in search of a national championship. They've been in search of one for a little bit longer. If you've got thoughts on the upcoming season, call us 315-443-2011 or send us a text 315-556-3929. You can also interact with us on Twitter or YouTube. You can find us there at WAER Sports Talk. AJ, I mean, man, it's another season, right, where Syracuse women's lacrosse has high expectations. This is obviously, I mean, a top program. Kayla Trainer's done a good job. There was a little bit of drama toward the end of last season and kind of another late season collapse, another loss against Boston College. Kind of feels like deja vu, right?
It does. I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, and I am excited for this season because this is always a great team and a great team to watch, but I feel like their window, they missed it. I think the last last season, the season before that was their window.
I honestly don't entirely disagree with you because you look at the losses on the defensive end this year. They are looking at some real big turnover this year.
Even attacking too. Natalie Smith is gone. They've lost a few attackers as well. So there's a lot of holes. There's a lot of young players, and the thing is they do recruit well. So I'm sure these freshmen will turn out well. But to start, I just think it's not a rebuilding year. I hate that in college athletics.
Oh, definitely not.
Because you're never rebuilding. You're retooling, I say. But I do think their window...
We're not tanking for draft picks.
No, exactly.
Losing does nothing for you, so rebuilding isn't really...
No, exactly. That's why when people say the Syracuse basketball team is rebuilding, I get angry. But that's besides the point. I just think last year and the year before, that was their big chance to bring it home, and they could not come through. And Boston College was their kryptonite each year.
Yeah, and I mean, BC is obviously a program also with some great acumen, but I mean, you talk about all these defensive, like Casey Benoit is probably now the number one defender on the team. I mean, the biggest defensive loss, though, and talk about drama. I mean, this was drama, too. Yep. Delaney Schweitzer's gone. She's at Northwestern. Yeah. And it's crazy because the whole reason it happened was because of a misunderstanding.
Yeah,
I mean, she signed with Athletes Unlimited.
Yeah.
Trying to play professionally, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then Northwestern somehow discovers that she had an extra year of eligibility and she transfers. So now, I mean, you're going to see Delaney Schweitzer back in the Dome in late February for a revenge game.
Crazy. Did not see that coming.
I mean... I know that maybe women's lacrosse doesn't have as many eyes as men's lacrosse, but it should because that game is going to be crazy. I mean, that is a sports storyline to watch around the country. I don't care what you're doing. I mean, you've got a goalie coming back into their old building trying to pick up a win for a team that has been a national powerhouse
That would essentially be like Kyle McCord. If Kyle McCord ended up getting another year eligibility and went somewhere else.
Yeah.
He went to Miami or something, and then it was like, oh, wow. It is a bizarre story the way that happened. But a player I do want to touch on that's coming back is Emma Ward. And I think that is a saving grace for this team because she consistently has great years. And it's going to be her last one. I think she needs to go out with a bang, and she needs to be the anchor for this team if they want to have success.
Right, yeah. They have to find people to score when the offense in the midfield isn't producing as much because they don't have as many of those automatic scorers now. I mean, you're a few years away from the Tyrells. You're a few years removed now. Well, you're a year removed from having Schweitzer on the back end to kind of bail you out. I mean, Yeah, you need Emma Ward. Likewise, you need Olivia Adamson as well
Yep.
to be a really big piece. Like, those are the two scorers who are coming back, who have put up good years every single year that they've been in Orange. So I really think, like, if you can't get consistent production out of them, they're going to struggle, because I think they're going to have to play a lot of high-scoring games. And that comes back to the fact that, this is every single year for them, but they do have a really tough schedule.
Yeah.
I mean, look at some of the places that they're going. And obviously, you're going to play UNC on the road. That's been traditionally a very good
They
program.
got to go to Loyola on the road, which doesn't sound like a test, but Loyola gave them quite a game last season. Now you got to go to their place and play. That's not going to be an easy one. That's before away at Pitt, too. I know Pitt's not a powerhouse, but still, it's on the road. So there's not easy games on this schedule. So it could be
you
up
got
and
Yale
down here.
on the road. Yale is a solid
Yep.
team. Obviously, you play Northwestern, and then you play Boston College at the end of the year, too. So that's the hump they haven't been able to get over. 7 straight L's against the Eagles. It's tough. If you're frustrated with the way that the last few years have gone, we want to hear your frustrations on this slushy and disgusting Friday night.
I didn't think it was going to snow tonight. It came out of nowhere.
I mean, it's bad out there.
I know.
So hopefully you're sitting inside with your FM dial tuned to 88.3. And if you are, we want to hear from you. 315-443-2011. You can also text us 315-556-3929. AJ and I are up with you until 9 o'clock tonight talking about lacrosse, both sides of the ball. Yeah, I mean, I think, like, it seems to me like there's always been a little bit too much storyline around this program. They just need to, like, go on a run, get hot, and try and put something together late in the season. Because one of the issues that they've had over the last 3 years is peaking too early in the year, where they look like they're playing their best lacrosse in
That's what happened
February.
2 years ago, where they got #1 in the country. It was like late February, and it looked as though they were the clear favorites to win it all. And then the end of the year, some injuries piled up, and they really lost a lot of steam.
Yeah, right. You need to make sure that you are peaking at the right time. And I really feel like Kayla Traynor has all the experience now to say, like, I know how we need to handle this late season stretch, because she's seen it go the bad way multiple times. So, like, why on earth can you not, get through it? I mean, obviously, it's more than just saying
win
games
against tough teams.
Yes, exactly. It's hard.
Yeah.
But understanding, the nature of the schedule, the nature of how maybe you get a little bit worn out toward the end of the year, you have to be able to navigate that as a coach. So I think this is a big year for her, too. Because at the end of the day, like, yes,
she
this
lost
team
some
is number
recruits
6
too
again
in the offseason.
Right.
So,
well, there's a lot. There was obviously some stuff going on with the program
Yeah.
toward the end of the year, and who knows what that contributed to transfer-wise. A lot that we don't see behind the scenes, certainly.
But I think there's some. What I'm trying to get at, I think there's some pressure on her. She's got to deliver.
Oh, no doubt. Because the expectation of this team is to win a national championship, and they haven't been able to do it.
Nope.
And so, with another top 10 ranking, 6th in the country going into the year, I really feel like you need to cement yourself this year. And I do agree with you. Like, if the window isn't closed, it is closing.
Definitely.
I mean,
I think it did
once you
close.
lose Emma, and
I think you're going to be opening a new one, and you'll see that with a variety of freshmen on the field at the start of the season.
Right. You have a lot of older players now. I mean, Olivia Adamson kind of burst her way onto the scene a few years ago. Now you're looking at the end of her career. You're looking at the end of Emma Ward's career. Like, these players kind of all of a sudden it seems like, we got one last chance to make a run at this thing.
Well, and part they got the window stayed open longer because a lot of them got those COVID years. And it was like, okay, they're coming back for that 5th year. This is the chance. And you stumble against BC, whether it's in the regular season or in the postseason.
I think the other thing is despite the fact that you're losing Delaney Schweitzer, there's not really an heir apparent to Delaney Schweitzer. Like, Daniela Guyette right now is probably the go-to in net, and she's largely unproven, and I will say, AJ, when you look at the games that she has played in, the numbers have been not pretty. And, not going to take anything away from her. Like, it's tough when you go in and you haven't been the number 1 in practice to go in all of a sudden and have the responsibilities of a number 1. So I certainly think, like, it's going to be a different conversation with a full year of practice and time getting experience and whatnot. But I also feel like you have someone largely unproven in net, and you have a really tough schedule. Like, and I think maybe the recruiting was affected this offseason. So, like I said, I think the one thing you're going to know very quickly is if this team is ready to compete or not.
I think so, yeah.
Because the schedule is not nice to you early on.
Away at Maryland, after that Cornell, and then away at UNC, and then Northwestern, who is another almost a BC level team, which they can never seem to beat. They lost to Northwestern
in the opener
last year.
Yes.
Yes, that's another team. This is going to be in Syracuse this time around. That's another team this team cannot seem to get past. And then after Northwestern, you have Clemson. They've got their program on the rise, and then you got Stanford, a new ACC team.
Well, yeah, Clemson just got Alexis Spallina.
Exactly,
one of those recruits you're talking about.
Another
flipped their commitment.
A lot of storylines in that game as well. So it's a tough schedule to start the season. You remember last year, I think they started out 2-2, so it was a bumpy start to last year. I think you'll probably see that same kind of bumpy start. But maybe that's okay. Maybe if they start out bumpy, get hot towards the end, beat BC in the end of the regular season, win the ACC, don't have to play Boston College until the final, maybe that's what this team needs. But I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but I do think this isn't the most talented roster we've seen in the last 4 years. The most talented rosters were the ones last year or the year before.
Yeah, right. There's just less options, and you need depth to win because players are going to get hurt throughout the year. You're going to have trials and tribulations in the locker room in terms of chemistry. Clearly, there's been some issues with the team getting tired out down the stretch. So, maybe the fact that there's less people for the responsibility to be shouldered by kind of makes you step up and say, well, like I got to make sure I'm pulling my end of the rope. But at the same time, if things go bad, I feel like they could go bad because
that's the fear.
There just is like a lack of depth this year. There's really no other way to say it.
Definitely.
So the players that you have to produce.
And that's why I think Emma Ward's so key, because every time she speaks to the media, she does seem like a leader. And I think she is a leader on this team, and they're really going to need to lean on her leadership when there are some tough times, because I think we're both in agreement. There probably will be some down moments this year.
Yeah, there's a lot of good teams.
Yeah,
I mean, the top of women's lacrosse is really strong. Yeah, and exactly. The same thing as the men's.
Yep.
It is the best conference.
It is.
So, like, if you're not competing from the jump, you can fall behind really, really fast.
Definitely.
Women's lacrosse season, you got to wait a little bit longer for that one. Things don't get going until a week from now against UAlbany. That's the way that the season's going to start, and likely a win for Syracuse in that game.
You'd
hopefully.
Hope so. Hey, the Great Danes always come to play.
That's true, actually. Syracuse. I mean, they came to play against Syracuse men's basketball this year. Gave them a run. So certainly the women's team trying to chase after another national championship. A lot on the line for Kayla Traynor and the rest of the squad. We'll take another step aside. When we come back, we're going to talk to our reporter for tomorrow. We're going back to men's lax, Alex Burstein. He's going to be in the Dome, breaking everything down. You'll hear him tomorrow night on the double overtime, but for now, he's going to join us here in studio, give you a little bit of a preview of what you can expect for Syracuse and Jacksonville tomorrow afternoon. All that and more, that's coming up on Sports Night here on WAER.
Thanks for listening. We hope you're enjoying this WAER sports broadcast. Our sports staff goes where the teams go, home and away, and prepare for days before each game broadcast. Our talk show and podcast hosts analyze games, pour over stats, and keep up on sports trends. These and many behind-the-scenes opportunities are made possible by listener donations. So if you're a fan or an alum, donate to keep our sports legacy strong at WAER.org and click Donate.
Thanks for listening. Not a member yet? Make a first-time gift today and help empower WAER to provide trusted journalism, music discovery, and community conversation for all, no matter where you live or how you listen, from broadcast to podcast, on air and online. Members help power everything you find at WAER. Please give today at WAER.org to support this work. How would you like to help WAER serve and engage the Central New York community?
Your public radio station is seeking new members for our Community Advisory Board.
Help us connect with our diverse audience, sharing the area's concerns and happenings.
Offer advice on station programming, initiatives, and collaborations.
WAER wants a group that's engaged while being ethnically, geographically, age, and gender diverse.
Learn how your voice can help improve public radio at WAER.org.
Back into Sports Night here on WAER. We are previewing the men's lacrosse season that starts against Jacksonville
tomorrow. And a guy that will be in the Dome is Alex Burstein. Alex, how you doing tonight on what has become a snowy Syracuse night?
I'm excited. I mean, it's lacrosse Eve. How can you not be excited? I'm glad it won't be snowy in the Dome because this would not be fun to play.
Yeah, I've been asked by some relatives who aren't in the gnome of Syracuse lacrosse and everything. They're like, how do they play? I'm like,
shades of the Hobart game.
They play in the Dome. Yeah, exactly.
Not as cold, though.
No, definitely. 315-443-2011. That's the number to get involved. If you have any questions for Alex on this Jacksonville squad, I'm sure he'd love to answer them. And Alex, the first thing I want to get to is this is a good Jacksonville team. Syracuse cannot underestimate them. I think it's going to be a blowout game, but I know you have something different.
I mean, I think this is going to be a few goal game. I think Syracuse will win it, but like you look at last year, Syracuse started with Vermont. It's a 8-8 team. There was a 20-7 win for Syracuse. But this is a Jacksonville team that was one game away from making it to the NCAA tournament. They've gotten better and better. They have the second highest win percentage in the nation over the last 3 years. This is a very good Jacksonville squad. Obviously, Syracuse is the better team, but, I mean, it could be close, especially some opening game jitters.
Alex, I appreciate you joining us, man. I know it's exciting. Syracuse has some high expectations. John Galloway's coming back into the Dome. You know, he played here. He was the goalie the last time Syracuse won a national championship back in 2009. But one of the things that I listened to him speak this week, and one of the things that really stuck out to me was that, you know, he said, we got a guy from Rochester. Like, everyone's talking about me coming back, but I'm just standing on the sidelines. We got a guy from Rochester playing in this game who's rooted for Syracuse lacrosse his whole entire life, and he's got family coming to the game. So why aren't we talking about him? I mean, Galloway seems like a great leader. Like, your impression of him kind of and what he's done to build this program up, because, I mean, he started this program. Like, this is his baby, and he's in his 9th year, and he really has done a tremendous job.
I mean, any coach that sticks with a mid-major team for 9 years really cares about their team. And, like, they weren't good for 5 years, 6 years. They haven't been close to being in the national picture until, like, 3 years ago. That's dedication.
Right, they beat Duke.
Exactly. They beat Duke twice.
That's huge. Yeah, I mean,
like, that's something Syracuse can't do most years.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why I think Syracuse has got to be watchful, because this team can pull off an upset. And the last thing you want in a championship expectation year is to start off the year with a loss against Jacksonville.
And that's exactly what happened when they beat Duke in 2022, was that, you know, Duke was a national championship hopeful. Jacksonville came in there early season. It was a huge upset. Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely possible.
And they build their schedule to play these teams. They play Syracuse. They play Duke. They play UNC later in the season. They're not scared to play the top opponents, and it's because they can compete with them, even if it's not a win.
Yeah, and I think, once again, it comes back to the fact that they have a coach who played at this level, right? Like, he understands how to prep you for this competition, because not only has he done it, but the last time anyone wearing a Syracuse jersey won a natty, he was right there with them. So, like, he knows the championship expectation and the level that you have to play at in order to put yourself in that position. I think it's going to be a really exciting thing to watch, for sure.
Here's the biggest key, and I'm sure you guys are going to agree with me. The biggest key is, and this is not just for this Jacksonville team, but maybe the whole year for Syracuse, cannot make games interesting. Last season, they would get big leagues. I think of UNC, Cornell, that went the wrong way. They would get big advantages and then put their foot off the gas. The other team would get back into it. And I understand that's Gary Gates' style. It is a very push the ball, score goals, pedal on the gas mentality, which is fine. But I think at times, if you get a big lead, maybe you can just kill some clock. You don't always have to be going for 20 goals, which it felt like sometimes last year, and I guess especially against a lower team like Jacksonville, you don't want to give them any hope. If you have a 10-point lead going into the fourth, a 10-goal lead going into the fourth quarter, keep it a 10-goal lead. Don't give them any hope to think that they could pull off some kind of upset.
I think that's why it's so important that this isn't the sophomore season for that crazy Syracuse class. This is the junior year. Like, you had your freshman year to kind of feel things out. You had your sophomore year to try things out. Now you know how to play college lacrosse. You know how to win NCAA tournament games, and now you're going to actually try to do it on the field. They can really game management, and we
were talking about this earlier in the show about the expectation, like the bare minimum, right? I said they got to make it to the championship game. AJ said just the Final Four. I want to hear your thoughts on that.
I've gone back and forth. I'm with you. I think they have to make the championship game.
If you get one game away, AJ, and you got all these scores, the second best offense in the country, I just don't understand.
It would be heartbreaking, but
I win one more
I would be fine. If they just got to Memorial Day weekend, I'd be fine.
Because are there 3 better teams than Syracuse in the country entering the season?
No, I think there's just one.
Exactly.
So but I don't sleep on Cornell. I think Cornell is right there.
I believe Cornell's ahead of them in the coaches poll.
Yeah.
So Cornell, I mean, obviously has, for my money, the best player in the country with CJ Kirk.
That's exactly. Yeah.
Cornell's good, but I just think if you got this group, this highly touted, they're going to go all in their senior year. You're going to lose Owen Hiltz. You're going to lose other big players, and they're never going to have played in a national championship game. It just feels like you've fallen short with this brand.
I mean, you talked about it. Joey Spallina was the guy in high school lacrosse.
Yeah,
if he goes 3 years without making a national title game, I mean, people thought he would be a national champion his freshman year.
Right.
That's a big question.
Most highly touted recruit probably in the last 8 years of college lacrosse.
A long time.
I mean,
I don't disagree with you guys. You guys are saying all valid points, and I understand it. I just don't. I think you got to get to the national championship is such lofty expectations because it's not easy to win.
It's not, but
lacrosse. It's not easy to
this
win.
Program. I mean,
I know.
You don't have 18 banners in the rafters for nothing.
Yeah, and look, they've gone dormant, and it's they've underperformed, and that's rightfully so. When you set the expectations so high, for me, if they're in Memorial Day weekend, regardless of how the result goes, assuming they get there, I'd still be satisfied, given that each year they've got progressively better. Then the next year, sure, that's the national title year.
You certainly can't come short of where you were last year.
No, absolutely. Oh, no, absolutely.
And
no,
you also
that's a failure.
I would say another requirement is to at least make it close in the ACC championship game and get there. Because, of course, don't forget last year they lost to Duke in the semifinal. Probably the worst game they played all year.
Was, definitely.
And this is a much weaker ACC this year.
Is.
Notre Dame's not as
UVA
good.
is not as
other
good.
than Syracuse. Syracuse might be the only ACC team that's better this year than they were last year.
I think that's 100% verifiable. Yeah,
I agree.
Duke, Virginia, and UNC have all considerably dropped off, and I do think Notre Dame is a little bit worse. And Syracuse is a little bit better. Exactly, like you said a little bit earlier in the game. Yeah. Talk about the rest of this conference though, because the ASUN is an impressive conference.
Yeah, don't sleep on that either.
Like you've got Utah, who Syracuse played last year. They're going to play Utah again this year. Jacksonville lost to Utah, Jacksonville lost to Utah in the ASUN championship last year. Syracuse beat Utah in the middle of the season. So, I mean, Utah, though, did keep it relatively close in that game. Yeah. This is a competitive conference. So just going back to the fact that I understand, this game in general, it's easy to look at it and say, oh, this is kind of a rollover game. They
can't
should
do that
come
too
away
much, though. You can't do
easily.
that too much.
Credit to this conference for building itself up to be a competitive conference in the country, I would say.
You got to beat the best to be the best. And, I mean, obviously they're few steps away from being the ACC, but they're playing really good teams. And also you look at the conference games, they're good games when they're playing each other. Like the championship last year between these two squads, it was good lacrosse. I mean, there was almost a big comeback by Jacksonville, which shows why they're a competitive team. They returned 4 of their top 5 scorers. But it's been a competitive conference, and they're only going to get more and more of that as they play these top-tier games.
We're going to touch on the schedule a little bit later, but the reason Gary Gait schedules these early tests is to get them ready for that tough ACC play, and that's why he's going to these challenging conferences to try and get those early tests in the beginning of the season. And I think he's going to get that from Jacksonville, but I think this team, I think you agree with me, Alex, they have to flex their muscles and show that they're a national championship team right from the get-go.
I mean, you mentioned it. Last year there were so many games where good in the first half, second half, no. I mean, if Syracuse goes up 10-1, it shouldn't end up being a 15-11 game.
Exactly.
It should be 20-7, 20-5. They need to keep up the pace the entire game. That's how you show that you're a dominant force. That's how you show that you're the number 2 team in the nation.
Absolutely.
Being physical in the midfield is huge to me. I think last year, you had a lot of good players. I mean, you're going to lose Jake Stevens in the midfield, obviously, this year. He was a ground ball machine. That guy was also an athletic machine, so that sucks. But I think you have some more physical bodies. You're adding Michael Grace, who is a big body. I know we talked about him a little bit earlier in the show. You add Ryder Ochoa, who is another guy who can use his body well, transfers over from St. John's. There are a lot of big physical guys, and now I said this earlier in the show too, but Grace had a lot of knee issues when he was at RIT, so I do kind of worry about that. But he's 6'3", so I'm not worried about the fact that he's going to be able to create space with his body. But I think Syracuse maybe last year was not a very physical team. I mean, I go back to that Colgate game; they got absolutely beat up.
Yeah. Cornell beat them up too when they were coming back.
In the outdoor elements, it was pouring with rain during that game, right? This is a team, and, I don't want to say, media narratives are one thing, but you play in a dome, you play inside. I think you can easily get the narrative that the team is a little bit soft if you don't start playing really physical. So that's what I want to see. I'm interested what you want to see, but, I want to see Syracuse beating teams offensively, because we know they can do that, but beating teams up, like leaving the game and being like, dang, they put a hurting on us.
I want to see not the midfield, but the middle of the field, because this is a completely different face-off unit for Syracuse. Mason Cone is gone, and now it's John Mullen's time to shine. Like, he could be really good tomorrow, and that would be a great sign for Syracuse, or he could be rusty, and, like, this is a Syracuse team. Even though we're talking about the ACC dropping off, these games are all going to be decided.
And we all know what happens when you don't have a good guy at the face-off.
You need possession.
Look at 2 years ago.
Yes.
They're playing a team tomorrow who lost their top all-time face-off guy. So now it's down to Nathan Cap left. He held the program record, so they're not really sure who's going to be taking it in the middle. It's probably going to be Drew Ripien. But this is an opportunity for Syracuse to dominate at the face-off circle. If they do that, that's a big, big test for the Orange.
And I just going to mention, I think this is important to mention, new rule with face-offs. One violation, then you have to sit out the next face-off, unlike before. I think it was 3, and then you were a man down. I believe that's what the rule was. So there's a new rule. That's a new wrinkle for this team to adjust
So
to.
they want the aggression, but after.
Yes.
Don't take Luke's midfield aggression comments until after you have full possession.
Johnny Mullen is interesting to me, though, because, I mean, that guy, you want to talk about physical, that guy is huge.
Yep.
I mean,
He's a tank.
Mason Cone, it's easy to forget about how big of an impact he had on the team last year. I mean, because this was a squad 2 seasons ago during the big groups freshman year with Joey Spallina and all them, where I mean they were rotating through face-off guys. You had Jack Fine, you had Johnny Rachuza in there, and nothing was really working out. So that was a huge hindrance of that team that had also a ton of offensive firepower. Last year, you figured that out. And, face-offs are what allowed you to beat Duke. Like, you could finally kind of at least hold off Jake Naso a little bit and get on top of Duke. In the regular season game, of course. They didn't do so well.
Don't talk about that.
But now, it is John Mullen's time to step up. I will say, it does give me confidence because from what I've heard, talking to Mason Cone last year, talking to Johnny Mullen, Mullen has a tremendous work ethic. Maybe one of the best work ethics on the team. And also, he's a physical beast. So he played a lot of guys in Massachusetts. Massachusetts isn't quite a top lacrosse state. Like you think about your New York or your Maryland. But it is good, especially if you play in the prep school regime.
Yes.
John Mullen stayed in the public school system, and he absolutely dominated some of the best teams when his team itself wasn't that good, but they won a lot of games solely because of him. So
Syracuse
he can
can do
take
that.
the pressure, right? Like he knows what it's like to not have a lot going behind him because the team he played for in high school was not all that great, but he was dominant and he just absolutely destroyed the Massachusetts public school circuit for a few years. So I mean, this is definitely a guy who can take over. I don't think there's any question about that. It's just he is still only a sophomore. He was playing very limited time last year, and when he played against Duke, he did get dominated by Jake Naso. So, this is a guy who's still got to work on his technique. I don't have any questions about the physical tools, but you got to be fast to win at this level.
He still had over 100 face-off wins. They would play him, not most of games, but he'd get playing time.
He
and I think that's important.
I think he played in almost every game.
Exactly.
At least made an appearance.
18 games,
so there you go. He played every single game last season, but obviously he was taking way fewer face-offs than Cone was. But like I said, he was good when he got the opportunity. So, I'm really confident about John Mullen. But if it goes bad, Alex, I'm sure that is one of the first things that you'll be asked about in the double overtime tomorrow.
Exactly, yeah. And before we let you go, Alex, is there any score prediction you got for tomorrow? How's this game going to swing?
I think Syracuse will start off strong. I think maybe second quarter they take the gas off a little bit, but I think they roll probably 18-9, I'd say.
There you go.
I think that's a fair prediction.
Yeah, that's a fair prediction. 18-9, that's what Alex Burstein thinks. You can follow him on Twitter at WAER Sports Talk tomorrow. He'll be in the Dome. He'll be giving all the insight from the Dome. You can comment if you want Gary Gate to get a specific question. Comment at WAER Sports Talk on Twitter. I'm sure Alex will try and ask Coach Gate that question post-game. But, Alex, enjoy the rest of your night, and thanks for hopping on SportsNite with us.
Thank you. Happy to be on.
Yeah. All right. Well, when we come back, me and Luke, we're going to give our predictions on the entire season. We're going to go game by game on both the men's and women's side.
The Grammy Awards Sunday will spotlight not just one or two new stars, but an entire new generation of pop divas.
If you told me the same time last year that all of these people would be some of the biggest names in pop music and on the Grammy stage tonight, I wouldn't have believed you.
Tune in for a preview of music's biggest night and performances. Sunday on Weekend Edition from NPR News.
Sunday morning from 8 to 10 on WAER.
But it's too late to worry about them now.
Susie Boggess joins us on the next Mountain Stage, along with the acoustic jazz guitar of Stefan Rembel, plus Mama's Broke, Denisha, and Gold Pine.
Hi, this is Susie Boggess. Join us this week in live performance on Mountain Stage.
Sunday from noon to 2 on 88.3 FM WAER.
Start your Sunday mornings off right with Sunday Morning Gospel from 6 to 8 a.m. right here on WAER. Hosted by Cora Thomas, the program features some of the best local and national gospel artists. You'll hear everyone from Daryl Coley to the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir to the Winans family. More information is available online at waer.org. Join us Sunday mornings from 6 to 8 a.m. for Sunday Morning Gospel on 88.3 FM WAER.
Welcome back to Sports Night here on WAER. Luke Burgess and AJ Myers here with you for the next 12 minutes. We're breaking down our thoughts on Syracuse men's and women's lacrosse's schedules on Lacrosse Eve. I don't know who termed that earlier in the show. Was that Alex or was that you? I think that was you. You said Lacrosse Eve.
Did I? I don't even remember, to be honest. I guess
Maybe
I
it was
did.
Alex, but
Maybe
one
it
of you
was.
said Lacrosse Eve, and I really like that term because we are just hours away, really. A noon face-off tomorrow against Jacksonville, and so, AJ, I'll get right into it. I also want our callers to get into it. 315-443-2011. You can call us there, or you can text us, 315-556-3929. You can let us know either way what you're thinking about the upcoming season for the men's team or for the women's team. We will start with the men's team, kind of like we did at the beginning of the show. How many losses is this team going to have? That's what we decided we were going to talk about. AJ, I'll go to you first.
I got 2 losses. I got the first one I have is at Maryland. And the reason I have at Maryland, I know Maryland is a team that didn't bring back a whole lot of talent, but they're always a good team. You can never underestimate Maryland. But I think they may be a little worn out from the start of the schedule. Jacksonville, Vermont, Townsend, very close. All those games are back-to-back-to-back almost. So not a ton of rest. First road trip to Maryland. I think they slip up against the Terrapins. The next loss is Cornell. I think Cornell is right on the same level with SU. It's a neutral site game. I think that's going to be another defeat. Then they come back and beat Duke and beat North Carolina. Another reason I think that is a loss against Cornell is because I think they beat the Irish. I think that is their big signature win of the season. They beat Notre Dame. They're so high. They're off a big high after beating Notre Dame. They come down and lose against Cornell. So I got 2 losses in the regular season that should set this group up nicely for the postseason.
I think that's such a brutal stretch.
The
Notre Dame,
end of
Cornell,
that,
and
yes.
Duke. I mean,
well, even though before that,
on
Virginia, Colgate. I mean, Colgate's no joke. They play the Orange very physical, like you mentioned. So it's a gauntlet at the end there. Away at Duke as well. It's not easy either.
I'm overly positive about this team.
Am I going to get undefeated from you?
No.
Okay.
1 loss
right.
on the year, and it is one of year 2. I think they're going to lose to Cornell.
Yeah.
I think Cornell really has an argument to be the best team in the country.
They showed it last year against Syracuse.
Right. I mean, C.J. Kirst is the best player in the country going into this year. He's the Tewaaraton favorite, the only guy who has better odds than Joey Spallina to win right now. That game's on Long Island. It's a battle kind of downstate.
So many guys on both squads are from the Long Island
right,
area.
And I just think Syracuse is going to be beat up after a tough start to ACC play. More ACC play on the way. It's literally sandwiched right in the middle. 2 games in, 2 games to go. I mean, that is going to be such a tough test to win, especially if you've played a Notre Dame team physical and the game hasn't gone too far either way. That's a close game, which I'm expecting that it will be. Then I just think it's going to be really tough to beat Cornell. I mean, that is a very, very diverse attacking team, and of course they're led by probably the best player in the country right now. So I have that, and then I'll tack on as well. I think they will probably lose in the ACC championship game. But I do think Syracuse is going to make a run to the national championship game. I don't know if they're going to win or not. If I don't know the opponent, it's hard to say who they're going to beat. But I think this team definitely has national championship potential. They've got all the tools. This is the year to get it done. So I think this is a 1-loss team in the regular season. And when you're looking back at everything, I'll say 2 or 3 losses, depending on, if you end up making it all the way to the big dance.
I think Syracuse, Notre Dame, Cornell are like the 3 teams I would say they can win a national championship. There's always a sleeper. I think Maryland came out of nowhere last year. Denver's always got a good squad. There's a lot of teams in the Big Ten that are very talented as well. So anything can happen in college lacrosse. One thing I do like with this schedule is there's not a ton of neutral site games. I know last year, I think they had 2 or 3 neutral sites.
I know they played Delaware in a neutral site.
The reason I'm not a big.
I know they played Charlotte.
Yeah.
They played Johns Hopkins in Charlotte.
Yeah, the atmosphere, the Delaware atmosphere was good. I remember the Charlotte atmosphere wasn't the greatest. So I like that they're playing away at away sites and home sites. None of that neutral stuff. I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah, I can agree with that. All right, let's take a look at the women's side of things. Obviously, we talked about the fact that there are some lofty expectations right now, but also a very, very tough schedule. AJ, what you think?
I got 3 losses. I think their first one comes in their 5th game of the season, Northwestern. It's at home, but Northwestern's a kryptonite for this team. I think there's too much inexperience on the roster. They won't be ready for that Northwestern game. And then at Loyola, I just think that's a trap game. You got away at Pitt, then you go away at Loyola. You have Johns Hopkins before that game against Pitt. So I think that's a trap game. I think they lose that one. And unfortunately, it pains me to say, I do not think they beat Boston College at the end of the year. That's 3 losses for the Orange.
I think I'm going to say 4 losses on the season. I'm just not like...
Away at Yale's not going to be easy either.
Yeah, and so I'll say Maryland, I think, is going to be a loss at the start of the season. Maryland is always a very, very tough team.
The men and women will both be there. That's a doubleheader.
Yes, exact. Same day, actually.
Yeah, same day,
they both play the Maryland men's game, I believe, is at 2 p.m. Is that right?
I think so.
I'll double-check that before I say that on the air. Yeah, 2 p.m.
Yep.
I think the women's game is a little bit later on in the day. That's going to be a fun day. I think the men will get it done. I don't think that the women's team is going to overcome that. Maryland, they played them really tough in the last few years. I think UNC on the road could be a loss, and then I'll say Northwestern and Boston College as well. I think those 2 teams, like you said, they've beat them up consistently, and Northwestern's got a really good goaltender this year.
Yeah.
I don't know how far. I don't know what the maximum potential. I honestly think if things go right, the maximum potential still could be another a run to the Final Four. But it's just so hard to say that this team is going to win it all when I don't think that they've necessarily gotten better.
No.
And I don't know.
They haven't proved to me that they can, unfortunately. It pains me to say that. They haven't proved. They've proven that they can't. They've proven that they don't show up in the biggest of moments.
Yeah, and unlike the men's lacrosse team, like when we're talking about, why is the rhetoric different? Well, it's different because the men's team has gotten better.
Yeah.
I think in the last 3 years, this is probably the worst that the women's team has been. So you're looking at a weakened attack.
Yep.
You're looking at Coco Vandiver now probably being your leader in midfield. You don't really have other bodies surrounding her that are going to be consistent distributors and getting the ball through in transition. So, you have to rely on fewer people. And when that happens, and if you're playing in a mediocre conference, it's one thing. But if you're playing in the ACC,
which is not a mediocre conference,
you have to have a full squad, and you have to have people who can step up when injuries happen. So
definitely.
I don't know if that's going to happen this year. You can still give us your thoughts. You're running out of time, though. 5 minutes. 315-443-2011. Or you can text us 315-556-3929. AJ, as we get closer and closer to wrapping up here, I will say the one thing we didn't talk about was kind of rounding out Syracuse's roster. Is there one player you're really excited to see or you think might step up who maybe has not seen as much of a big role in the past few years, who might step out of the shadows a little bit this year?
I think this player has seen, he's been mentioned before. We just haven't mentioned him tonight on the defensive side. Billy Dwan. I think he's a really good guy for this team to keep an eye out for. But I'm really, really most interested to see how Jimmy McCool plays in goal. I don't want any issues there. I don't want that to be a talking point this season. He needs to get off to a good start.
I agree with you. Jimmy McCool he's a question mark, not because he's not good. This is a guy who was an All-American coming out of high school.
You're recruited to Syracuse. You got talent.
Playing prep school in Boston.
Yeah.
He was playing against legit talent, but he hasn't been in the spotlight, right? Well, Mark, you're in front of a guy who is obviously one of the elite goaltenders in all of college lacrosse. I think certainly he's going to need to step up and prove himself in the early moments, like you said. You got to look comfortable against Jacksonville tomorrow.
You can't.
Pressure's on.
You can't make that Jacksonville game interesting. If it's interesting, then you want to talk about pressure. That pressure's going to be even more. If you make it close against Jacksonville, I know it's just the start of the season. You want to play your best lacrosse at the end of the year, but but you got to look convincing if you want to be considered a national title contender. If you want to be considered the second best team in the country, which right now they are, according to Inside Lacrosse.
The two transfers as well. Last thing I'll say, I'm really interested to see how they look.
Yeah.
Michael Grace, grad student coming over from RIT, and then you've also got Ryder Ochoa, who's coming over from St. John's, undergrad. He's interesting. He's got a lot of speed, a lot of skill.
does really good in the portal too. I mean, he knows how to find guys in the transfer portal that perform well.
Yeah, he's done it in the past, obviously. You look last year, Christian Muley over from Lehigh and Jake Stevens from Princeton. Both those guys ended up being huge pieces to
parts,
the team.
Yes.
Yeah, so who knows? Those guys are going to need to step up. Syracuse has its first game tomorrow against Jacksonville. It's going to be right here on our WAER airwaves. Want to hand out some thank yous before we wrap things up. Our producer, Nate Cunningham. Our reporter, Alex Burstein. Engineer, Griffin Marcy. And on desk, Nick Evans and Drew Albaugh. Tomorrow, McClure Remodeling. Countdown to face-off at 11:30. The double overtime goes up until 3:30. That's with Jish Sokolsky and Nico Horning. Syracuse looking for a win to start its season. For now, Luke Burgess and AJ Myers from our Ostrom Avenue studios saying so long, Syracuse men's lacrosse, hoping to get to a 1-0 start tomorrow. It's right here on WA.